Christmas Tapes, Chapter 2, The Lioness. Mary flicked through an old copy of Witch Weekly, bored. She glanced over at the clock on Lily's bedside table. Quidditch practice was nearly finished. She could go down and meet Marlene in a minute. She hated being by herself, and she hated being at a loose end. Consequence of growing up in a small flat with a big family, maybe. The thought of sitting alone in her bedroom at home, reading a magazine in total silence, was laughable. There was always a sibling jumping on the bed, or hammering on the door, or hiding in the cupboard playing a long-abandoned game of hide-and-seek. And then her mother would enter, with a baby on her hip, wooden spoon in hand, hair wrapped up in a bright yellow scarf like a crown. "What you think you been doing, girl? Up and help me with dinner." She smiled to herself now, remembering this. Mary was always queasy with homesickness around Christmas. She longed for the noise and colour of home. Grand as Hogwarts was, the castle just never properly felt comfortable. She slid off the end of her bed lazily and stretched, then walked to the full-length mirror to check herself. She stood as tall as she could, raising her chin and stretching her calves, then turned from side to side, twisting to check that her skirt sat right over her hips, and that her chest wasn't sticking out too obviously. She smirked. She looked good, wearing her favourite brown suede mini-skirt. Lily had gasped when she saw it. "But what about when you sit down?" A mustard yellow turtleneck jumper and a neat little brown waistcoat embroidered with a paisley design, which she'd bought in a market at Southall last year. Mary liked to stand out. She knew she wouldn't have this figure forever. Why not flaunt it? McGonagall would go spare if she saw her, but it was a non-uniform day, so the old bat couldn't give her detention, only disapproving looks, and Mary was used to those. She'd been getting them from old white ladies all her life. She went to her dresser next, and rummaged about in the top drawer for a suitable lipstick. Red for Gryffindor. Then her outfit would look more like house pride. That might make Marlene smile at least. Even if Miles didn't understand Mary's devotion to fashion, she at least appreciated the effort. McGonagall liked Marlene, of course, because she wasn't too girly and she played Quidditch. Mary liked Marlene because on their first night at Hogwarts, when Mary had thought she was going to die of misery from missing her family, Marlene had performed the most hilarious comedy routine, impersonating McGonagall's stern looks and prickly Scottish accent, so that Mary couldn't breathe for laughing. Marlene always knew how to make you feel better. She would make a really good healer one day. Mary wasn't sure what she wanted to do after school. They'd always said they'd get a cool flat together in London, and have parties every weekend. Though now Lily was going out with Potter, it would probably just be Marlene and Mary. Maybe Remus too. Mary had an idea that he was as aimless as she was, career-wise. The problem was, and Mary would admit this to no one, she just didn't want a magical job. She couldn't see what was in it for her. No one in her family could use nuts or sickles or anything of their stupid wizarding money, so what was the point? But of course, she had no muggle qualifications at all, so it was a dead end either way. Her cousin had done a typing course last summer, and Mary's mother kept on at her to sign up once Hogwarts had finished. She often fantasized about getting a trendy job at a magazine or a record company, bewitching a typewriter to work unattended and spending her time flirting with male models and pop stars. She finished her lips, then licked her index finger and smoothed down her eyebrows, before straightening her skirt one more time and leaving the dorm. She skipped every other step on the way down, even in her high-pointed boots. Lily often teased her that her Patronus was probably a gazelle. Well, she had, until the end of last year, in defence against the dark arts, when Mary had finally produced one. A lioness. "Hiya, Mary!" Connor Fitzpatrick, a very freckly red-haired 6-year, came trotting over. Mary tried not to roll her eyes, though it was hard. He'd been ambushing her like this for weeks. It was getting silly. "Hello, Connor," she smiled, carrying on her way. He followed her. "You look gorgeous," Thanks. Ugh. Mary sometimes wondered if she'd spoiled herself, going out with Sirius Black, and then Roman Rotherhide in quick succession back in 6th year. The problem with having 2 of the best-looking boys in the school as your first serious boyfriends was that once those relationships was over, her options were a bit limited. She wasn't shallow, though Marlene had accused her of it on a few occasions. But she wasn't easily won either, despite some very nasty rumours. The thing was, boys got boring after a time. The physical side of things was always the best bit. She never had any qualms about that. A good time was a good time. But it was all the emotional stuff. She never seemed to line up quite right with any of them. They were either too distant, like Sirius, or too clingy, like Roman, expecting you to pander them all the time. "What do you want?" Marlene would sigh. "Them to worship you?" Mary had replied, "No, of course not." But it was a huge lie. Why shouldn't she want to be worshipped by the person she was shagging? What else were men for? Marlene didn't get it. Mary had come to accept that. "What are you up to later?" Connor was asking now. "Oh, I'm really busy today. Up until Christmas, actually." She shook her head, walking faster. They had passed through the portrait hole now, and were moving at pace along the stone hallways down towards the nearest entrance to the grounds. He kept after her like a yappy little Jack Russell, and her patience was wearing thin. Even if Connor was 10 times more handsome, he was in 6th year, and Mary had standards. "Maybe in the new year, then." He was keeping up with her, stupid high heels. Look, I don't think so. Sorry, Connor." "Oh, go on, be nice. Went out with Eric Leith. He told us." That annoyed her. They'd reached the staircase now, and just her luck, it had decided to start moving just as soon as they were halfway down, meaning they had to stop and wait until it decided where to land. She folded her arms crossly and turned to look him in the eye. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yeah, you do. He told us. You and him, round the back of the hog's head. He says you let him put his—" Mary whipped out her wand, furious now, and held it to Connor's stupid freckly chin. "Listen to me, you little creep. Eric Leith is a lying prick. I went for a drink with him twice, and he forgot to bring cash both times, and he still owes me for it. Did he tell you that?" Connor shook his head, taking a sharp step backwards and nearly stumbling on the marble steps. She pressed forward, advancing on him. "I'm a fucking lioness, you little pervert. I wouldn't let Eric Leith touch me with a 10-foot barge pole, let alone his grubby little hands. Only went with him because I felt sorry for him. He's pathetic, and so are you, so get lost." The staircase reconnected with a grinding clunk just at that moment, and Connor scambled backwards, retreating to the tower. Braver at a distance, his face contorted with embarrassment. He sneered down at her. "Dirty little slag, as if I'd fancy you. Only tried because everyone says you're easy." "Sticks and stones," she tutted at him, putting her wand away and walking down the stairs, her cheeks hot and her throat tight. She held her head high. You never let them see how it feels. You never let them know how it works. "Run along, little boy." "Mudblood," he spat from the top of the stairs, before turning tail and scurrying away. Her breath caught in her chest at that one. She held the banister and pressed her lips together. Fucking wizards.